Introduction. The greatest show on earth. Imagine standing at the edge of a circus tent. The lights dim, the curtain lifts, and what's revealed isn't clowns or acrobats, but the messy, unpredictable, thrilling drama of human behavior with money. No charts, no equations, just people, flawed, hopeful, fearful, shaping the greatest show on earth, the story of finance. Morgan Housel opens with a paradox that defines this book. You don't need a sky-high IQ to do well with money. You don't need to understand complex models or forecast the economy better than anyone else. What you need, above everything, is the ability to manage your own behavior. Because in the real world, investing is less about what you know and more about how you act. To prove this, Housel tells us about two men. The first was Richard Fuscone, a Harvard-educated former vice chairman at Merrill Lynch. His credentials glowed. His house in Greenwich, Connecticut, was a mansion complete with multiple pools and guest houses. In the early 2000s, Fuscone borrowed heavily to expand his empire. But when the 2008 financial crisis hit, his wealth crumbled. The man with every advantage went bankrupt. The second man was Ronald Redd, a janitor and gas station attendant in Vermont. He had no pedigree, no spotlight. He drove a second-hand car and wore simple clothes. But he saved diligently, invested quietly, and let compounding work its slow magic. When Redd died in 2014, he shocked everyone. His net worth was over $8 million, most of it left to his local library and hospital. Two lives. One with every credential, one with none. One ended in ruin, the other in quiet abundance. Housel's point is simple, almost brutal. Financial success is not about how smart you are, but how you behave. And financial failure can come not from lack of knowledge, but from arrogance, overconfidence, and impatience. This sets the stage for the book's core idea. Finance is not like physics. In physics, laws are universal and predictable. In finance, outcomes are driven by human quirks: fear, greed, envy, optimism, denial. People aren't spreadsheets. They're emotional creatures, scarred by their own life experiences. A depression survivor sees risk in every boom. A millennial investor who only knew growth markets feels invincible until the crash comes. The introduction makes a bold claim. To understand money, you must understand behavior. It is the greatest variable, the ultimate wild card. And it explains why two people with the same information can make completely different decisions, why one sees opportunity and the other sees disaster. What makes this show truly universal is that it never ends. Markets rise. Markets fall. New generations step in, old ones fade, but human behavior repeats. The details change. The actors change. The stage set changes, but the story is the same. Courage and fear, greed and restraint, risk and survival. That's why Housel insists this book isn't a technical manual. It's a guide to behavior. It's not about maximizing spreadsheets. It's about mastering yourself. Because wealth is not just built by knowledge. It's protected, sustained, and grown by the habits and decisions that seem invisible until it's too late. The curtain falls on this opening act with a challenge to the listener. Which story will you live? The Richard Fuscone story of brilliance undone by ego? Or the Ronald Read story of modesty and patience rewarded beyond imagination? And with that, the greatest show on earth begins. Next, we step into Chapter 1, No One's Crazy, where Housel reveals why people see money through such wildly different lenses and why none of us are as rational as we think. Chapter 1. No One's Crazy. Picture two neighbors sitting across the street from one another. Both of them live in the same city, read the same headlines, and shop at the same grocery store. Yet when it comes to money, their worlds cannot be more different. One hoards cash, refusing to invest a single dollar. The other pours everything into the stock market with unshakable faith. Who's crazy? According to Morgan Housel, neither of them. The first lesson in the psychology of money is that financial decisions don't come from cold rationality. They come from personal history. Each of us builds our views of money not from theory, but from the slice of the world we've experienced. That narrow window defines how we think about risk, reward, and opportunity. Take someone born in 1950. They turned 30 in 1980, just as inflation hit double digits and mortgage rates soared above 15%. Debt was toxic, savings accounts barely kept up, and the stock market looked flat and disappointing. Their instincts were shaped in a world where borrowing felt dangerous and the future was uncertain. Now compare that with someone born in 1990. They became adults in the era of cheap credit and booming tech stocks. To them, borrowing was easy, and investing in the market seemed like a guaranteed path to growth. Both are products of their time, and both are acting rationally within their own frame of reference. Housel emphasizes that this is not just a generational divide, it's universal. By 2020, the American stock market had more than a century of history. But the average investor experiences perhaps 2 or 3 decades of adult financial life. That's less than 5% of the whole record. Imagine trying to understand an epic film after seeing just one scene. That's how most of us understand money. We mistake our little slice of history for the whole truth. That's why debates about money are often so emotional. People aren't clashing over statistics, they're defending lived experiences. A grandmother who tells her grandchildren to never trust the stock market is not ignorant. She may still feel the shock of Black Tuesday in 1929 or the grinding fear of the Great Depression. A millennial who insists that every dip is a buying opportunity isn't reckless. They grew up in a world where every downturn since 2009 bounced back with astonishing speed. To each of them, their strategy is common sense. The same story plays out across cultures. A German family that lived through the Weimar hyperinflation of the 1920s passed down a deep suspicion of paper money. A Japanese worker scarred by the lost decade of the 1990s learned that stocks can stagnate for years despite optimism. An American who entered adulthood after the housing crash of 2008 may forever see real estate as risky, while their parents still see it as the safest bet. Nobody's crazy. Everyone is shaped by the history they carry. Housel argues this has 2 important consequences. First, it calls for empathy. Before you judge someone's financial choices, remember that they may be responding to scars or opportunities you've never known. Second, it demands humility. However logical your own strategy feels is still tinted by your personal experiences. You are not seeing the entire picture. This humility is vital because it keeps us cautious. It reminds us that what seems like a law of nature in one generation may be an anomaly in the long arc of history. Investors in the 1990s assumed tech stocks would rise forever. Homebuyers in the mid-2000s assumed property could never fall nationwide. Both were wrong. Their beliefs were grounded not in foolishness, but in the blind spots of their own time. The deeper lesson is that money decisions are never purely analytical. They are human decisions driven by memory, fear, optimism, and context. Recognizing this truth does not make us perfectly rational, but it helps us avoid arrogance. It helps us see that behind every portfolio is a story, and behind every choice is a life lived under unique circumstances. So when you catch yourself asking, why would anyone do that with their money? The better question is, what history are they carrying? Because once you see their past, their behavior often makes perfect sense. The chapter closes with a reminder that sets the tone for the entire book. Nobody is crazy. We are all shaped by our own worlds. The best we can do is acknowledge our biases, respect others, and build strategies flexible enough to survive in a reality bigger than our own perspective. Next, in Chapter 2, Luck and Risk, we'll see how even the most talented individuals can meet completely different fates, and why chance plays a much bigger role in success than most of us want to admit. Chapter 2. Luck and Risk. 2 boys walked the halls of Lakeside School in Seattle in the late 1960s. Bill Gates and Ken Evans. Both were gifted, curious, and hungry to understand the strange new machines called computers. Both spent endless hours tinkering, dreaming of futures shaped by technology. Yet their paths split in a way no effort or intelligence could have predicted. Gates, with a rare combination of talent and timing, became one of the richest men alive. Evans, equally brilliant, died tragically in a mountaineering accident before he could see his dreams realized. This story is Housel's entry point into one of the most humbling truths about money and life. Success is never purely earned, and failure is never purely deserved. Skill, hard work, and discipline matter enormously. But luck and risk, the unpredictable forces of timing and circumstance, matter just as much. Gates himself has admitted this. One reason he had an early edge was that Lakeside was one of the very few schools in the world with access to a computer terminal in the late 1960s. Out of millions of teenagers, he was one of a tiny fraction who could practice programming before the personal computer revolution exploded. That opportunity was an accident of geography, wealth, and school leadership. If Gates had been born a few years earlier, or in a different city, or at a school without such resources, the story of Microsoft might never have happened. Kent Evans, by contrast, never got the chance. Risk, the dark twin of luck, cut his life short. His intelligence and promise were real, but risk doesn't care about fairness. It strikes without warning, changing destinies in an instant. Housel's point is not to diminish effort. It is to remind us that outcomes are never clean equations. We tend to tell tidy stories after the fact, that someone succeeded because they were visionary or failed because they were foolish. But those stories often overlook the silent role of chance. For every celebrated entrepreneur, there may be dozens of equally capable peers who didn't get the right breaks. For every family that thrives, another collapses under a risk they never saw coming. The 2008 financial crisis is a vivid example. Millions of families lost homes and life savings, even those who had lived cautiously and avoided reckless bets. They were swept into the storm created by others' excess. Their misfortune wasn't a reflection of their character. It was the reality of systemic risk. On the flip side, plenty of reckless investors in the years before the crash rode the boom and cashed out just in time. Were they wise? Or just lucky? The same pattern echoes across history. Joseph Stalin once survived a street brawl where he was stabbed, a random twist that allowed him to live long enough to rise into power. Napoleon was almost killed by chance when a cannonball narrowly missed him as a young officer. These examples remind us that the thin line between greatness and obscurity often lies in random events we never control. When it comes to money, this has two big implications. First, be careful how you learn from others. Copying a billionaire's playbook may ignore the hidden strokes of luck that made their story possible. What worked for them may not work for you because their circumstances can't be replicated. Second, don't be too harsh in judging failure. Many who fall short did the right things but were struck by bad luck. Their process may have been sound, even if their outcome wasn't. Housel urges us to focus on process over results. Judge yourself and others not by whether an outcome turned out well, but by whether the decisions were reasonable given the information available at the time. If someone invested responsibly and still lost money, that does not mean they were wrong. If someone gambled recklessly and got rich, that does not mean they were right. Outcomes lie to us because luck and risk distort the picture. For practical investing, this mindset translates into humility and resilience. Build strategies that tilt the odds in your favor, saving consistently, diversifying, and avoiding catastrophic risks, but accept that luck will always influence the final score. Prepare for setbacks. Celebrate success, but never confuse it with inevitability. The chapter ends with a sobering reminder: success is fragile, and failure is not always deserved. Luck and risk are invisible companions in every financial journey. Respect them, and you'll make wiser, kinder, and more resilient choices. Next, in Chapter 3, we'll see how even extraordinary wealth can fail to satisfy, and why the inability to define enough can drive people into ruin, no matter how much they already have. Chapter 3. Never enough. Imagine reaching the summit of success. You've built a career from scratch, earned respect in boardrooms, and secured a fortune that could support generations. By almost any measure, you've already won. Yet, instead of resting in that achievement, you reach again, hungry for more, willing to risk it all. This is the paradox Housel explores in the story of Rajat Gupta and Bernie Madoff, two men who had everything but destroyed themselves because enough was never part of their vocabulary. Rajat Gupta's story begins in hardship. Born in Kolkata, India, he lost both parents while still a teenager. Against enormous odds, he excelled in school, attended the prestigious Indian Institute of Technology, and later Harvard Business School. By the time he reached his 50s, Gupta was one of the most respected executives in the world, sitting on the boards of Goldman Sachs, Procter & Gamble, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. His estimated net worth exceeded $100 million. For a boy who had once been orphaned, he had achieved the unthinkable. And yet in 2008, Gupta was caught leaking confidential information from Goldman's boardroom to hedge fund manager Raj Rajaratnam. These tips might have earned him a few $1,000,000 at most, a fraction of what he already possessed. Why would a man of his stature gamble his reputation, freedom, and career for so little? Housel's answer is stark, because he didn't know how to stop. He had no definition of enough. Bernie Madoff's story is even larger in scale. By the 1980s, Madoff was already rich and highly respected. His legitimate trading business was successful, and his influence reached deep into Wall Street and Washington. He could have lived out his life as a wealthy, admired figure. Instead, he built the largest Ponzi scheme in history, promising consistent returns that no honest strategy could deliver. For decades, he enjoyed the illusion of invincibility, private yachts, country clubs, the admiration of peers. But beneath the surface, it was all a lie. When the scheme collapsed in 2008, thousands of investors were ruined, his family was disgraced, and Madoff died in prison. Like Gupta, he had wealth beyond measure. But without a sense of enough, it was never satisfying. These stories are extreme, but Housel's point is that the same dynamic operates in all of us. If your satisfaction depends on keeping up with someone richer, smarter, or more successful, you'll never arrive. There will always be another rung on the ladder, another neighbor with a bigger house, another colleague with a higher salary. Comparison makes contentment impossible. Enough doesn't mean rejecting ambition or refusing growth. It means recognizing limits. It means asking, at what point am I trading things of real value, freedom, integrity, family, peace of mind, for gains that don't truly matter? Gupta traded his freedom. Madoff traded his reputation and family's trust. Both paid a cost infinitely greater than the benefits they pursued. Housel highlights Warren Buffett's famous warning: to make money they didn't have and didn't need, they risked what they did have and did need. That is foolish. This isn't only about billionaires. Ordinary people make the same mistake when they borrow heavily to impress others, chase speculative investments they don't understand, or stretch themselves so thin that one setback topples everything. The wisdom of enough acts as a compass. It keeps you from envy, helps you resist reckless risks, and allows you to see money as a tool rather than a scoreboard. Without it, wealth becomes an endless race where the finish line keeps moving. With it, you can step off the treadmill and decide for yourself what a good life looks like. The challenge is simple but profound: define your enough. Write it down. Talk about it with your family. Hold it as a shield when the world tempts you to stretch for more. Because if you don't set that boundary, someone else's definition will pull you into their game, and you may lose everything you already have. Next, in Chapter 4, Confounding Compounding, we'll see why the greatest financial force isn't brilliance or timing, but patience, and how small gains multiplied over time become extraordinary fortunes. Chapter 4. Confounding Compounding. Imagine planting a single seed. At first, it seems insignificant, barely noticeable in the soil. But given enough seasons, that seed grows into a tree. The tree bears fruit, and the fruit carries more seeds. What begins small becomes vast, not because of sudden leaps, but because of steady growth multiplied over time. That is the essence of compounding. And in finance, nothing explains wealth better. Housel opens with the story of Warren Buffett. By many measures, Buffett is the most successful investor in history. But the astonishing fact isn't just his skill, it's the timeline. Buffett began investing as a child and never stopped. His fortune today exceeds $80 billion, but almost all of that came after his mid-60s. If he had stopped investing at age 60, his name might never have been widely known. His genius wasn't simply in picking stocks, it was in letting compounding do the heavy lifting over decades. Compounding is deceptively simple. Earn a return, reinvest it, and earn returns not just on your original amount, but also on the gains. Rinse and repeat. Over short periods, it looks unimpressive. 10% growth on a small sum doesn't change your life. But stretch it over 30, 40, or 50 years, and the numbers become mind-bending. That's why time matters more than rate. A modest return sustained for decades can outpace a brilliant return held briefly. Housel contrasts Buffett's story with that of Jim Simons, the mathematician behind Renaissance technologies. Simons generated returns so extraordinary that they dwarfed Buffett's annual performance. Yet because Simons started later and compounded for fewer years, his net worth lags far behind Buffett's. The lesson is clear. Time in the game matters more than flashes of brilliance. This principle doesn't only apply to billionaires. Ordinary savers can harness compounding with consistent, patient contributions. A small monthly deposit into an index fund may feel invisible at first, but compounded over a lifetime, it grows into something extraordinary. The hard part isn't the math, it's the patience. Most people can't sit still for years without being tempted to tinker, chase higher returns, or abandon their plan when markets fall. Housel points out that compounding is confounding because it defies our intuition. Humans are wired to think linearly, not exponentially. We understand steady increments, but struggle to grasp growth that accelerates on itself. That's why people underestimate both the potential of saving and the danger of debt. Just as investments snowball upward, interest on loans snowballs downward. Left unchecked, it can bury a family as surely as compounding can build one. The real takeaway isn't just mathematical. It's psychological. Wealth creation isn't primarily about intelligence, it's about behavior. Can you be patient enough to let compounding work? Can you resist the urge to interrupt the process when it feels slow? The world rewards consistency far more than brilliance because compounding is only visible to those who wait. In your own financial life, this means respecting time as your most valuable ally. Start early if you can. Stay consistent. Avoid catastrophic risks that might knock you out of the game. And remember that the point isn't to chase the highest short-term returns, but to stay in the game long enough for the quiet miracle of compounding to unfold. The chapter closes with one of Housel's central messages. Good investing isn't about getting rich quick. It's about getting rich slowly, and then staying rich by letting time magnify small, reasonable decisions into something extraordinary. Next, in Chapter 5, Getting Wealthy versus Staying Wealthy, we'll explore why the skills that create wealth aren't the same as the skills that preserve it, and why survival is the ultimate financial strategy. Chapter 5. Getting Wealthy versus Staying Wealthy. Imagine a mountaineer climbing toward the summit of Everest. Reaching the top is an achievement, but it's only half the journey. The descent is just as dangerous, and more people die coming down than going up. Wealth works the same way. Getting rich and staying rich are two very different skills, and survival, not brilliance, is what makes fortunes endure. Housel begins by pointing out a pattern. The world is full of stories of people who gained immense wealth only to lose it. Lottery winners who squander millions. Entrepreneurs who strike gold, then push too far. Traders who make a fortune, only to be wiped out by a single bad bet. The same qualities that generate wealth, risk-taking, optimism, boldness, can also destroy it if they aren't tempered. The truth is that the traits required to get wealthy are not the same as the traits required to stay wealthy. The first demands aggressiveness, optimism, and a willingness to take risks others avoid. The second demands humility, caution, and an appreciation of luck. Most people confuse the two, and that confusion explains why so many fortunes vanish. Take Warren Buffett. His genius is not just that he picked good stocks. Many people do that. It's that he never allowed himself to be ruined. He started investing as a child and compounded steadily for over 70 years. Through recessions, panics, crashes, and bubbles, Buffett remained. His defining trait is not boldness, but survival. That is why his fortune, towers above those who were flashier but burned out. Housel calls survival the ultimate financial superpower. If you can stay in the game long enough, compounding will carry you further than intelligence or luck. But if you take risks that threaten your very survival, one mistake can erase decades of progress. The math of compounding is unforgiving. It rewards consistency and punishes ruin. This is where the barbell personality comes in, equal parts optimism and paranoia. Optimism keeps you invested, believing the future will reward patience. Paranoia keeps you cautious, aware that disaster can strike any time. Blending these mindsets means you are hopeful enough to take reasonable risks, but careful enough to protect yourself from being wiped out. History provides countless examples. Many investors in the roaring 1920s were convinced prosperity would never end. They leveraged heavily to maximize gains, and when the Great Depression hit, they lost everything. On the other hand, those who kept cash reserves, lived below their means, and avoided excess debt often survived the storm, even if they missed some upside during the boom. Their humility became their edge. The same principle applies to everyday life. Staying wealthy means building in a margin of safety, savings for emergencies, insurance to protect against catastrophic loss, and living within your means. It means recognizing that missing out on a hot investment is far less damaging than being ruined by one. Housel reminds us that nobody stays rich by constantly swinging for the fences. They stay rich by avoiding the kinds of risks that can't be undone. Consider the story of Rick Guerin, one of Warren Buffett's investing peers. Guerin was as talented as Buffett and Charlie Munger, but he used heavy leverage to magnify his returns. When the market turned against him, he was forced to sell his holdings. Buffett and Munger, who avoided leverage, were able to hold steady and grow. Guerin faded from history not because he lacked intelligence, but because he didn't prioritize survival. The lesson is simple but hard to practice. Getting money requires boldness, but keeping it requires humility. Staying wealthy often looks like caution, conservatism, and restraint. But it is these unglamorous qualities that make fortunes endure over decades and generations. In short, avoiding ruin is more important than chasing every opportunity. Survival trumps brilliance. And the real measure of financial success isn't how much you can gain quickly, but how long you can sustain it. Next, in Chapter 6, we'll explore why a small number of extreme outcomes drive the majority of history, and how the biggest results often come from the rarest events. Chapter 6. Tails you win. Picture a casino. Hundreds of people place bets, dice roll, cards shuffle. But the casino doesn't need to win every hand. Its profit comes from the long-term edge, and from a handful of big nights where luck swings its way. Investing and life itself work in much the same way. Most events don't matter much, but a small number of rare, extreme events, the tails, shape nearly everything. Housel begins with stock markets. The majority of companies that ever list on exchanges fail to produce meaningful returns. Most contribute little to investors' wealth. But a small number, like Apple, Microsoft, or Amazon, deliver gains so immense that they carry the entire market upward. The lesson: markets don't move because every company does well. They move because a tiny minority become giants. The same principle shows up in personal investing. Buffett's wealth is not evenly spread across hundreds of decisions. It's concentrated in a few legendary bets: Coca-Cola, American Express, and a handful of others. A lifetime of decisions produced vast returns, but the bulk of his fortune came from a small fraction of those choices. The tails made the difference. History tells the same story. Scientific progress is driven by a few breakthrough discoveries among thousands of failed experiments. Entire wars can be shaped by a single decision or battle. Housel reminds us that outliers drive everything, yet we underestimate them because they are, by definition, rare and unpredictable. This is why it's so hard to separate skill from luck. A few extraordinary outcomes can make a person look like a genius, while countless failures can hide the fact that persistence itself was the key. Think of venture capitalists. Most of their investments go nowhere. but one Facebook or Google repays all the losses many times over. Tails win. The psychological challenge is learning to accept this unevenness. Many people give up too soon because most efforts yield little. They overlook that enduring long enough to catch a rare tail is often the only path to extraordinary results. Housel's point is simple. You don't need to be right often. You need to be right occasionally, and then allow that rare success to compound. This has practical implications for ordinary investors. It means diversifying because you don't know in advance which stock or fund will be the big winner. It means staying invested because if you're out of the market during those rare years when tails strike, you miss the very events that drive long-term returns. And it means humility, recognizing that you can't predict tails, but you can position yourself to benefit when they appear. In life beyond money, the same lesson holds. A career may be defined by one pivotal opportunity. A relationship can change the course of your future. A single decision to persist when others quit can alter everything. Tails drive disproportionate outcomes in every domain. The irony is that tails are obvious only in hindsight. Before Apple became Apple, it was just another struggling company. Before Amazon became the world's marketplace, it was a risky online bookstore. Success is impossible to predict in advance, which is why the only strategy is patience, diversification, and endurance. Housel concludes that embracing tails means adjusting expectations. Most of what you try won't matter, but some things will matter enormously. The key is to keep playing, to stay exposed to upside, and to accept that the extraordinary is rare but decisive. Next, in Chapter 7, we'll see why money's greatest value isn't luxury or status, but the ability to control your time and live life on your own terms. Chapter 7. Freedom. Picture a weekday morning where you wake up, not to an alarm clock, but to sunlight creeping through the window. There's no commute waiting, no boss tapping their watch, no meetings cluttering your calendar. The day is yours. That feeling, control over your time, is the richest dividend money pays. We often confuse wealth with what can be seen. The cars, the houses, the holidays, all the glittering proof that someone made it. But these are surface markers. Housel reminds us that what really improves happiness is far quieter: autonomy. Wealth is not just having more, but having control. Why is this so often overlooked? Because freedom is invisible. You can display a Rolex, but you can't display the fact that you left work early to watch your daughter's school play. You can flaunt a luxury car, but not the luxury of turning down projects that don't align with your values. And because freedom is invisible, it's undervalued, even though it is what almost everyone really craves. Housel points to research showing autonomy is among the strongest predictors of life satisfaction. When people feel in charge of their time, their reported well-being rises regardless of their income level. Conversely, when income is high but control is absent, stress festers. The paradox is striking. Someone earning £50,000 with flexibility often feels wealthier than someone earning £200,000 chained to a calendar they hate. This reframes saving entirely. Too often, saving is sold as sacrifice. Skip the coffee. Don't eat out. Delay gratification. But in Housel's framing, saving is about buying freedom, reclaiming hours, days, and years of your life. Every pound saved can be thought of as a tiny brick in the wall that protects your time. Conversely, debt is selling freedom forward. Borrowing obligates your future self to pay for the choices of your present self, reducing the number of options you'll have later. Consider some examples. The family who chooses a modest house below their budget doesn't just save money, they save time. They buy the freedom to withstand a job loss without panic, to say no to overtime, to take holidays without dread. The young worker who drives a dependable but unflashy car isn't just avoiding payments, they're preserving options. They buy evenings free from extra shifts, weekends that aren't traded for bills. Housel also shares stories of people who consciously optimized for autonomy rather than income. One professional deliberately stepped off the corporate ladder, taking lower pay, in exchange for work that allowed more personal time. Another saved aggressively not to buy more things, but to reach the point where they could walk away from a job they hated. The common thread wasn't visible wealth, but invisible control. And freedom, Housel insists, is relative. For one person, it may mean retiring at 50 to travel. For another, it may mean the ability to work flexible hours to spend time with children. For someone else, it's the freedom to decline projects or clients they don't respect. There is no universal definition, but the test is always the same. Are you spending your time in line with your values, or are you forced into trade-offs you resent? The psychology is straightforward. Lack of control produces stress, anxiety, even illness. Regaining control reduces stress at its root. It's why someone who can leave a toxic job feels a rush of relief greater than any luxury purchase could provide. The car in the driveway can't offset misery in the office, but the option to leave the office altogether transforms life. The practical advice follows naturally. When making financial decisions, ask not, what status does this offer me, but what freedom does this give me? Each pound saved, each instance of living below your means, is not deprivation, but the purchase of time. Every avoided debt is a refusal to sell away your future freedom. This also explains why lifestyle inflation is so insidious. Every time your expenses rise with your income, you trade away the very freedom higher income could have bought. The bigger house and the flashier car aren't just purchases, they're obligations, chains tying down future years. True wealth is saying no to that trap. In the end, freedom is the invisible dividend of money. It's not loud or flashy. It's lived in the quiet mornings when you own your day, in the choices you make without fear, in the ability to walk away when something doesn't serve you. It is the richest form of wealth because it is measured not in possessions but in time. Next, in Chapter 8, we'll see why the very symbols we chase to impress others often backfire, and why the car you hope earns admiration rarely does. Chapter 8. Man in the Car Paradox. Imagine a man sliding behind the wheel of a gleaming new sports car. The paint is polished, the engine growls, and as he drives through town, heads turn. To him, it feels like admiration. He thinks people are impressed by him. But in reality, almost nobody is thinking about him at all. They are thinking about themselves. What would it feel like if I were in that car? How would people look at me? The admiration he craves is an illusion. This is what Morgan Housel calls the man in the car paradox. It is one of the sharpest psychological traps in personal finance. We imagine that by owning visible markers of success, we will gain respect. The truth is that people rarely admire you for your possessions. They project themselves into the picture. The car, the watch, the house, these things trigger fantasies, not gratitude. The paradox stings because it clashes with our instincts. We long to be seen, to be admired, to feel validated. Consumer culture exploits that longing by selling us status symbols. But the admiration we buy is thinner than smoke. The crowd on the street doesn't walk away thinking, "What an admirable man." They think, "I want one of those." At best, they forget you altogether. At worst, they envy or resent you. Housel warns that this misunderstanding fuels endless cycles of spending. People chase possessions, believing respect will follow, only to find the feeling is hollow. So they escalate, bigger house, faster car, flashier clothes, and still the respect doesn't arrive. Attention? Maybe. Envy? Perhaps. But not admiration. Not love. Not the warm respect that actually satisfies. That deeper respect is earned differently. True admiration comes from behavior, humility, generosity, quiet competence. We are drawn to those who listen more than they speak, who show kindness without expectation, who succeed without arrogance. They may live in modest homes or drive ordinary cars, but their presence inspires trust and affection. Ironically, the more someone flaunts wealth, the less respect they often receive. The paradox creates another trap. In trying to buy admiration, you often sacrifice the very qualities that would have earned it. To afford the car, you work longer hours at a job you don't love. To finance the house, you bury yourself in debt. To chase status, you compromise time with family, generosity toward others, even your own peace of mind. In the end, you are left with possessions but little respect, admired less than before. Housel urges us to flip the script. Respect cannot be purchased. It is cultivated in the invisible choices you make, keeping promises, treating others fairly, showing restraint. These are the things people remember. Think of the leaders or mentors you admire most. Chances are it wasn't because of the car they drove or the clothes they wore. It was how they treated people. There's also freedom in recognizing how little others think about you. Most people are absorbed in their own lives. They aren't dissecting your car payment or your brand of shoes. Realizing this is liberating. It means you can stop performing for strangers and start living for yourself. When you understand the paradox, you stop trying to buy respect and start investing in the things that actually bring happiness. Housel draws a crucial distinction. There is nothing wrong with enjoying nice things. If driving a beautiful car genuinely gives you joy, that is valid. But problems arise when purchases are aimed at others' perceptions. Because others are not really perceiving you, they are imagining themselves. The car that delights you is a good purchase. The car that disappoints you because it didn't earn applause is a costly mistake. He also points out how this lesson ripples through our financial lives. The man who buys the car for admiration often also buys the house for status, the clothes for attention, the holidays for display. It becomes a pattern, a treadmill. Each purchase is meant to fill the gap that admiration never closes. Recognizing the paradox lets you step off that treadmill. It frees you to align money with your own values, not with illusions about what others think. The practical message is simple but profound. Respect is not for sale. Attention can be bought, envy can be provoked, but the quiet respect of others is earned through character. If you want admiration, focus less on possessions and more on how you live. That's harder, but it's also lasting. And this shifts the meaning of wealth. Wealth is not about signaling to strangers. It is about the quality of your life, the strength of your relationships, the freedom you experience in your days. Understanding the man in the car paradox helps dismantle one of the most expensive illusions in the modern world. Because in the end, nobody is impressed by the man in the car. They are impressed by the idea of themselves in the car. Once you understand this, you can stop spending to impress and start spending to live. Next, in Chapter 9, Housel will show us that the truest form of wealth is not the things people notice, but the things they cannot see at all. Chapter 9. Wealth is what you don't see. Picture a quiet suburban street. One house has a shiny new car in the driveway, its paint catching the afternoon sun. Another house looks plain, maybe even a little dated, the lawn patchy, no new toys visible. If you had to guess which family was wealthier, most people would point to the house with a gleaming car. But as Morgan Housel warns, that assumption is often dead wrong. What we see are spending choices. What we don't see is wealth. And wealth, by definition, is what you haven't spent yet. It is the savings account, the investments, the financial buffer quietly compounding in the background. That's why wealth is invisible. It doesn't announce itself. The paradox of money is that the very things people display to signal wealth are proof that some of that wealth is already gone. Housel makes the point sharply. When you see someone with a luxury item, you know they spent money, but you don't know how much they have left. They could be thriving, or they could be drowning in debt. The car, the watch, the house, none of these prove wealth. They prove expenditure. True wealth is silent. This is one of the hardest lessons to internalize in a world obsessed with appearances. From childhood, we are trained to equate what we can see with success. Advertising bombards us with images of happy people surrounded by possessions, as if buying the product were proof of prosperity. Social media has amplified this to an extreme. Curated feeds showcase holidays, designer clothes, luxury meals. Yet we never see the bank balances behind them. The illusion is powerful, but it is only an illusion. Housel tells us that wealth is built by restraint, by the money not spent. It is what allows for options, the freedom to change jobs, to handle emergencies, to invest in opportunities, or simply to sleep better at night. And because restraint is invisible, people underestimate it. Nobody applauds when you drive the old car for another 5 years. Nobody congratulates you for making lunch at home instead of dining out. Yet those quiet, unseen decisions are what build real wealth. He offers a practical mental shift. When tempted by a purchase, remember that the most impressive financial move is often the one nobody notices. Walking away from a luxury you could afford but choose not to buy, that is wealth creation. Every pound saved and invested grows in silence, compounding into a future others may never see, but which you will live. Consider the difference between rich and wealthy. Rich is visible. Rich is the car, the clothes, the holiday photos. Wealthy is invisible. Wealthy is the ability to wake up and not worry about bills. Is the security of knowing you can withstand a downturn. Is the opportunity to say yes or no without fear. Many who look rich are not wealthy, and many who are truly wealthy do not look rich. This lesson is liberating once you grasp it. It means you don't need to win the game of appearances. You don't have to match the spending of your peers or prove yourself with visible markers. You can live below your means and quietly accumulate wealth, knowing that your security is far more valuable than their fleeting admiration. Housel provides examples of people who live modestly while quietly building immense wealth. Think of the janitor who dies with millions in investments, shocking his neighbors. Or Warren Buffett himself, who lived for decades in the same house he bought in the 1950s. Their wealth was not in what they displayed, but in what they retained. There's also a warning here. Because wealth is invisible, it is easy to misinterpret others' success. We copy their spending habits, thinking that is the path to prosperity, when in fact it is restraint and patience that build it. This is why so many fall into the trap of lifestyle inflation. As income rises, so does visible consumption. But wealth only grows when a portion of that rising income remains unseen. The practical strategy, then, is to rewire how you evaluate success. Stop measuring yourself against what you can see in others. The car in the driveway is not evidence of financial health. The bank balance, the investments, the freedom to choose, those are the true measures, and they are invisible to outsiders. In your own life, celebrate the invisible victories, the money saved, the debt avoided, the investments held through discipline. Housel's insight is stark but freeing. Wealth is what you don't see. It is the dividend of decisions not made, of purchases not bought, of restraint practiced again and again. In a culture that rewards the loud, wealth whispers. And the whisper is stronger because it represents not just what you have, but what you have kept. So the next time you feel the tug of envy, seeing someone else's display, pause and remember, they showed you what they spent, not what they saved. The truest financial strength is silent. In Chapter 10, Housel builds directly on this idea, explaining why the single most powerful financial habit is not earning more, but to save more, and why the discipline of saving is the foundation of every other money decision. Chapter 10. Save money. Imagine a family gathering around the dinner table. Conversation drifts to careers, investments, and who's doing well. Someone boasts about a promotion. Another mentions a hot stock pick. Then comes a quiet voice, "We just save a lot." The table falls silent because in a culture obsessed with flashy success, the simplest and most powerful financial act, saving money, rarely gets applause. Morgan Housel argues that saving money is the single most important financial skill. Is more crucial than chasing high investment returns, predicting markets, or earning a massive salary. Why? Because savings give you control. They buy time, flexibility, options, and peace of mind. And unlike market returns, which you cannot control, saving is entirely within your grasp. Saving, however, is often misunderstood. Many see it as deprivation, as going without. But Housel reframes it. Saving is the gap between your ego and your income. If your ego demands that every rise in income be matched with visible consumption, you will never save, no matter how much you earn. But if your ego is quiet, You can live below your means, and the gap between income and lifestyle becomes wealth. This is why saving is powerful for people at every income level. You don't need to be a high earner to build financial strength. A modest income with disciplined saving can produce more long-term security than a high income with lavish spending. History is full of janitors, teachers, and clerks who retired with fortunes built not from massive salaries, but from steady saving and compounding. Housel emphasizes that savings are not just about retirement or buying a house. Savings are freedom in the present. They are the buffer that allows you to leave a toxic job, handle a medical emergency, or seize an unexpected opportunity. Without savings, even high earners can feel trapped, living from paycheck to paycheck. With savings, even modest earners can feel free. He contrasts this with the obsession many have with maximizing investment returns. People will spend endless energy chasing the next hot stock, timing markets, or hunting exotic assets. Yet a far simpler and more reliable way to build wealth is to increase your savings rate. Market returns are uncertain, savings are guaranteed. Every pound not spent is a pound kept, ready to grow quietly in the background. There is also an emotional benefit. Savings reduce stress. They soften life's inevitable blows. Knowing you have a cushion transforms how you experience uncertainty. A job loss, a broken car, a medical bill. These can feel like crises when you have no savings, but like manageable inconveniences when you do. This emotional stability is priceless, and it comes not from intelligence or luck, but from the habit of saving. Housel shares a crucial reframe. People ask, "What's the return on my savings?" The real answer is, the return is freedom. The return is security. The return is the ability to say no to things that compromise your values. Saving is not just a financial act, it is a lifestyle choice. It reflects the kind of life you want, one where you are in control, not beholden to circumstance. He also notes that saving money compounds with time in surprising ways. The earlier and more consistently you save, the more powerful compounding becomes. But even if you start late, saving still delivers benefits. Unlike investment returns, which depend heavily on timing and luck, saving is universally beneficial at any stage. Another common misconception is that saving is only possible once you earn a high income. Housel dismantles this. Savings are born not from income, but from behavior. Many people with high salaries save nothing because their spending rises in lockstep. Meanwhile, those with average earnings can build substantial wealth if they live modestly. Behavior, not pay, determines saving. This leads to an empowering truth: anyone can save. It requires discipline, perspective, and a willingness to resist the pull of appearances. Every saved pound is a brick in the foundation of financial independence. It may not be glamorous, but it is transformative. Housel drives home that saving also makes you adaptable. Because the future is unpredictable, savings give you the flexibility to pivot when life changes. Whether markets crash, industries collapse, or personal crises arise, those with savings are resilient. They are less fragile, less desperate, less trapped. That resilience is one of the greatest returns on saving. In a world full of complex financial advice, the lesson is refreshingly simple: save. Save not because you know exactly what you'll need or when. Save because life is unpredictable. Save because the act itself builds strength, resilience, and freedom. And save because it is the one variable you can fully control. The story is not about maximizing wealth for display. It is about maximizing your ability to live on your own terms. Saving money may not impress anyone at the dinner table, but it quietly builds the kind of life that everyone else secretly longs for. Next, in Chapter 11, Housel explores why the best financial decisions are not the most mathematically perfect ones, but the ones you can stick with, even when life gets messy. Chapter 11. Reasonable is greater than rational. Picture a chess grandmaster studying a board. Every move is calculated, every variable measured. In finance, many people believe this is how decisions should be made: cold, rational, mathematically optimal. But Morgan Housel reminds us that human beings are not machines. We do not live in spreadsheets. We live in messy, emotional, unpredictable lives. And in money, the best decision is rarely the perfectly rational one. Is the reasonable one, the decision you can live with for years without breaking under pressure. This chapter is a challenge to the textbook idea of perfect rationality. Economic theory often assumes that people act as if they are machines, maximizing utility, running cost-benefit analyses flawlessly. But in the real world, that is impossible. You do not experience money as an equation. You experience it as anxiety about bills, pride in providing for your family, envy when comparing yourself to neighbors, and relief when crises pass. Housel insists that reasonable choices are more powerful than rational ones because they are sustainable. Take investing. The rational model may tell you to hold the investment that produces the highest expected return, even if it is volatile. But if that volatility causes you to panic and sell at the bottom, the rational strategy collapses. Reasonable investing, by contrast, accepts lower theoretical returns in exchange for a strategy you can stick with. It might mean keeping more cash than optimal, or holding bonds for stability, or avoiding complex instruments you don't understand. It is not mathematically perfect, but it is practically effective. This is why so many investors fail. They aim for rational but cannot sustain it. The market tests not just intelligence, but emotional endurance. When the headlines scream, when friends are panicking, when your account plunges, what matters is not what a model says, but what you can stomach. A reasonable plan, even if less efficient on paper, beats a rational one you abandon under stress. Housel uses the example of retirement savings. Textbook rational advice may tell you to delay spending and maximize every dollar for the highest compounded return decades later. But what if that means living a life of deprivation for years, only to arrive at old age with regrets about experiences missed? A reasonable strategy balances saving with living. It acknowledges that enjoying a family holiday or a hobby today may slightly reduce the compound curve, but adds joy and memories that make the journey worthwhile. This shift from rational to reasonable also explains why people make decisions that economists often criticize as irrational. For example, paying off a low-interest mortgage early may not make sense mathematically if your investments earn more. But emotionally, being debt-free can bring peace of mind that no spreadsheet captures. That peace of mind is reasonable and valuable. Housel argues that the purpose of money is not to maximize equations, but to maximize how you feel about your life. A rational model may dismiss small indulgences as wasteful, but if buying a coffee with a friend makes your day better, that decision is reasonable. Financial decisions exist within human lives, not sterile formulas. Another powerful example is holding cash. Rational models call cash a drag on returns. But reasonable behavior recognizes that cash is security. It is optionality. It lets you sleep at night, knowing you can handle an emergency. And because peace of mind keeps you invested through turbulent times, cash can indirectly improve long-term returns by preventing panic. The lesson here is humility. The future is unknowable, and human emotions are not programmable. Striving for rational perfection is futile. Striving for reasonable sustainability is achievable. Housel wants readers to accept imperfection in exchange for endurance. Financial success is not about squeezing every last decimal point of return. It is about staying in the game long enough for compounding to work. Reasonable is greater than rational, also broadens how we judge others' financial choices. We may look at someone's decisions and sneer that they are inefficient. But if those decisions make them sleep peacefully, handle stress well, and stick with their plan, then those decisions are successful. Your reasonable is not someone else's reasonable. Money is deeply personal, and context matters. Housel distills it into a simple principle: the best financial plan is the one you will follow. Not the one that looks perfect in a model, but the one that works in your messy, emotional, human life. That is what allows compounding to do its work year after year. In the end, reasonable decisions outlast rational ones. Rationality can snap under stress. Reasonableness bends but holds. And when it comes to money, endurance beats brilliance every time. Next, in Chapter 12, Housel turns to the unpredictable nature of the world, reminding us why forecasts fail and why humility about the future is essential to survival and success. Chapter 12. Surprise. Imagine it's the late 1990s. Analysts and commentators flood the airwaves, convinced that the stock market can only go up. The internet is booming, everyone is getting rich, and forecasts of endless prosperity dominate the conversation. Within a few years, the bubble bursts. Companies collapse, investors lose fortunes, and the same voices who predicted certainty are suddenly silent. This is the story of money. Surprise is the only constant. Morgan Housel argues that the single most consistent feature of history is that it constantly surprises us. The future is always stranger than we expect. Our predictions, no matter how sophisticated, are fragile because they are built on limited knowledge. We think we know how the world works, but reality has a way of humbling us. Consider just the past century. At the start of the 1900s, no one predicted two world wars, the rise and fall of communism in Europe, the civil rights movement, the moon landing, or the digital revolution. In the 1980s, few foresaw the collapse of the Soviet Union. In the 1990s, few predicted the September 11th attacks. In 2007, hardly anyone foresaw the global financial crisis, despite clear signals in hindsight. And in the late 2019s, few imagined a pandemic shutting down the world economy overnight. Again and again, the story is surprise. Why is surprise so common? Because human beings are wired to learn from what has just happened. Our imaginations extend only a little beyond our experiences. We project the recent past forward, expecting it to continue. But the world shifts in ways our models cannot capture. Housel reminds us that history is a misleading teacher. It tells us what happened, but not necessarily what is most likely to happen next. This is why forecasts fail. Experts armed with data and models appear confident, but their predictions are just extrapolations of recent trends. They rarely anticipate what truly moves history, the events that no one sees coming. Markets, politics, technology, they are all shaped most powerfully by shocks. Surprise is not the exception, it is the rule. Housel illustrates this with the example of economic cycles. Before every major crash, there's a chorus insisting that the system is stable. Before every major boom, there are voices warning of doom. In both cases, the turning points surprise the majority. This is why humility is so important. The biggest risks are the ones we cannot see, the ones outside our field of vision. So what can we do in a world where surprise dominates? The answer is not to predict better, but to prepare better. Housel urges readers to embrace the reality of uncertainty and build resilience. That means saving more than you think you'll need. It means diversifying rather than betting everything on one outcome. It means staying flexible so you can adapt when the world inevitably surprises you. This mindset shifts the focus from precision to endurance. Instead of asking, "What will happen next?" ask, "How can I survive and thrive no matter what happens?" This is the philosophy of robust financial planning. It is less about forecasting and more about margin of safety. Housel also notes that surprise is not always negative. Many of the greatest advances in history were positive shocks: vaccines, the internet, declining poverty, rising literacy. The lesson is not to fear surprise, but to respect it. Life will deliver both setbacks and breakthroughs that no one could have foreseen. The key is to stay positioned so you can withstand the bad and participate in the good. The danger comes when we cling too tightly to narratives. People want certainty, so they tell themselves stories about the future. But those stories can blind us. In 2006, homeowners believed real estate could never fall nationwide. In 2019, few imagined global travel grinding to a halt. Narratives give comfort, but they also breed fragility. Reality will write its own script. The wisest approach, Housel concludes, is humility. Admit what you don't know. Expect to be surprised. Build systems that can absorb shocks, not fragile structures that depend on precision. Financial success is less about forecasting the future and more about preparing for the unknown. The takeaway is stark. Surprise is guaranteed. The only real question is whether you will be ready when it arrives. Next, in Chapter 13, Housel explores how margin of safety, the buffer between you and disaster, is the most underrated principle in finance and in life. Chapter 13. Room for error. Picture walking across a rope bridge stretched over a canyon. With no guardrails, every step feels dangerous. Add safety rails and a harness, and the risk transforms into adventure. That difference is what Morgan Housel calls room for error, the buffer that separates survival from ruin. Room for error means leaving slack in your system. No plan unfolds exactly as written. Jobs vanish, markets crash, illnesses strike. Without margin, these shocks wipe you out. With margin, they hurt, but you survive. Engineers know this well. Bridges are built to hold many times more than their rated weight. Aircraft carry redundancies. The Roman aqueducts that still stand were deliberately overbuilt. Money works the same way. A financial plan that only succeeds if everything goes right is not a plan at all, it's a gamble. This is why Housel advocates saving more than spreadsheets demand, holding more cash than seems efficient, and avoiding debt that assumes a flawless future. Spreadsheets may dislike idle cash, but people are not spreadsheets. People face recessions, layoffs, and unexpected bills. Slack is what lets you keep going. Consider investors who borrow heavily to amplify gains. When markets rise, they shine. When markets fall, they collapse. Compare that to the cautious saver with a conservative mix of assets and healthy cash reserves. They look slower in good times, but when storms hit, they stay afloat. Survival is what lets compounding do its quiet work. Room for error also applies beyond investing. A career tied to a single employer or industry is fragile. Diversifying skills and keeping options open is career resilience. Even time management follows this rule. A calendar, packed edge to edge, leaves no space for the unexpected and collapses under pressure. The obstacle is cultural. We worship efficiency, no waste, no slack, maximum output. But efficiency is fragile. An airline that sells every seat with no backup descends into chaos at the first delay. A supply chain tuned to perfection snaps when one link breaks. Efficiency impresses on paper, but resilience wins in real life. Housel admits he keeps more cash than models recommend and invests conservatively. It's not because he fears the future, but because he respects uncertainty. Compounding only works if you stay in the game. Room for error is the cost of admission, and slack buys you more than survival. It gives you flexibility. With buffers, you can avoid desperate choices. You can wait out downturns and even act boldly when others panic. What looks like inefficiency is actually optionality, the chance to make better decisions because you have time. The ultimate lesson is that financial strength is not about precision, it is about durability. Fragile wealth depends on everything going right. Resilient wealth depends on having enough margin to endure when things go wrong. The resilient may look ordinary in the short run, but in the long run, they win because they're still standing. Build slack into your system. Save more. Borrow less. Diversify more. These choices may feel conservative, but they are the foundation of endurance. Next, in Chapter 14, Housel turns to the fact that our goals and desires evolve more than we think, and why accounting for those changes is critical to wise decisions today. Chapter 14. You'll change. Imagine yourself 10 years ago. What music did you play on repeat? What clothes felt stylish? What goals seemed urgent? Now ask, how many of those choices still feel right today? Chances are you've changed more than you realized. Morgan Housel opens this chapter with a simple but profound truth. We are bad at predicting how much we will change in the future. This has huge consequences for money. We often make long-term decisions about careers, investments, even where to live, under the assumption that our future selves will want what our present selves want. But time proves otherwise. Desires shift. Priorities evolve. What once felt essential often becomes irrelevant, and what once seemed unimaginable becomes central. The danger is locking ourselves into rigid commitments based on temporary preferences. Psychologists call this the end of history illusion. People recognize they've changed a lot in the past, but they underestimate how much they'll change in the future. A teenager imagines their identity is almost fully formed, but at 30, he looks back and sees someone almost unrecognizable. At 30, the same person assumes 40 will be similar and is wrong again. We repeat this mistake all our lives, confident that the person we are today is close to our final version. Housel's insight is that our future selves are strangers we haven't yet met. Why does this matter in finance? Because money decisions are often long-term bets. A career path chosen at 20 may no longer satisfy at 40. A mortgage taken at 30 may feel burdensome at 50. An investment portfolio built for one risk tolerance may not fit a decade later. If we fail to account for how much we will change, we risk building a life optimized for someone we no longer are. Housel illustrates with stories of people who pursue extreme financial goals only to abandon them when they realize the destination no longer appeals. The executive who sacrifices family life for wealth, then later longs for time he can't buy back. The retiree who finally earns the right to slow down only to find their identity was tied to work. These are not failures of intelligence. They are failures of imagination, an inability to picture how dramatically desires evolve. The solution, Housel argues, is flexibility. Instead of optimizing for one perfect future, build options into your life. Avoid commitments that are irreversible. Choose careers that develop transferable skills. Invest in ways that don't lock you into a single narrative. Save money not just for a goal you can name today, but for a goal your future self hasn't yet discovered. Savings in this sense are not just financial capital, but optionality capital. He extends this idea to happiness. Many people assume that reaching a certain milestone, wealth, status, possessions, will lock in satisfaction forever. But happiness adapts. The car, the house, the promotion soon feel ordinary. Meanwhile, our values shift. We crave time, freedom, relationships, or meaning more than we once craved money or recognition. Planning for a static version of happiness ignores how dynamic the human heart is. Housel cautions against ridiculing past goals. They mattered at the time. Growth means honoring the journey while recognizing that our direction changes. What matters is not that desires shift, but that we give ourselves room to adapt. Rigidity is the real danger. The family that mortgages itself into immobility, or the professional who ties their worth to one narrow ladder, discover too late that they've built cages for their future selves. The practical takeaway is to embrace humility. Admit that your current self cannot fully predict your future self. Accept that some of today's goals will be abandoned. This is not wasted effort. It is part of the process of discovering what really matters. By saving broadly, diversifying goals, and designing flexibility into your life, you create the freedom to pivot when you inevitably change. Housel's own life illustrates this. Early in his career, he obsessed over proving himself in finance. Later, he shifted towards writing, where he found lasting fulfillment. Had he locked himself into one path without room to pivot, he might have prospered financially but failed personally. His lesson is clear. Today's identity is not final. The wisest plan is one that assumes change and prepares for it. The broader philosophical point is liberating. Recognizing that you'll change reduces the pressure to have every answer now. You don't need the perfect job, the perfect house, or the perfect retirement plan today. You need resilience and flexibility, a portfolio of choices and savings that allows your future self to adjust without regret. In the end, Housel reminds us that money is not the goal. Money is the tool that buys time and options. And options are what make change possible. To deny change is to deny growth. To expect it and prepare for it is to give yourself the gift of freedom. Next, in Chapter 15, we'll explore why every financial decision carries hidden costs and why recognizing those costs is essential to building lasting wealth. Chapter 15. Nothing's free. We're drawn to the promise of something for nothing. Free trials, easy money, shortcuts to success. But Morgan Housel makes it clear, nothing is free. Every choice in life, and in money, comes with a price tag, even if you can't see it at first. In investing, the cost is rarely labeled in dollars. It comes as stress, risk, and volatility. The stock market's long-term record of strong returns looks like a gift. But the hidden price is enduring downturns, crashes, and uncertainty. Those who can't tolerate the toll won't see the gains. Volatility isn't a penalty. It's the price of admission. Housel compares it to an amusement park. You don't complain about the entry fee because you understand it's the cost of the rides. In markets, too many people treat drawdowns like a broken promise instead of the natural ticket you pay to enjoy compounding wealth. History reinforces this. A century of stock market growth has been punctuated by wars, depressions, bubbles, and recessions. Investors who endured the toll collected the reward. Those who tried to sneak in for free, timing the market, chasing safe bets, often lost out. The same truth echoes elsewhere. Education isn't free. You pay in years of effort. Careers demand stress and sacrifice. Health demands discipline. Relationships require compromise. Everything that matters carries a cost. Pretending otherwise leaves you unprepared. The real danger comes when people mistake cheap for free. Teaser loans, get-rich-quick schemes, hot stocks, the costs are hidden until they strike hard. Interest rates reset. Markets crash. Debt demands repayment. What looked like free gain often proves ruinous. Housel's advice is not to avoid paying prices, but to pay them knowingly. The best investors budget for the tolls. They see downturns, fear, and uncertainty not as unfair punishments, but as the natural costs of staying in the game. That mindset shift from complaint to acceptance turns fear into endurance. The choice is always yours. Will you pay the short-term price of saving or the long-term cost of insecurity? Will you pay the price of volatility or the slow erosion of inflation? You cannot avoid the toll booth, but you can choose the road. Wealth is never free. But when you understand and embrace the price, the payment feels worthwhile. Next, in Chapter 16, we'll see how other people's goals and timelines can distort our own, and why recognizing the difference keeps us on track. Chapter 16. You and me. Investing would be easier if it were just you and your goals. But it isn't. It's you, your goals, and everyone else's. The market is a crowd, and every person in that crowd is acting on their own timeline with their own needs, fears, and ambitions. Morgan Housel warns that failing to see this is one of the biggest reasons people make costly mistakes. The problem is simple. Markets mix investors who have radically different horizons. A pension fund may invest for 50 years. A day trader may hold for minutes. A retiree may need cash next month, while a 20-year-old is investing for the year 2070. All of these decisions flow into the same market prices. And when you look at those prices, it's easy to confuse someone else's urgency with a signal about your own. Housel illustrates this with downturns. Imagine the market falls sharply. Is that because businesses are doomed forever? Or is it because some traders need to raise cash today, regardless of long-term value? If you're investing for decades, but you interpret short-term selling as evidence you should panic too, you've confused their goals with yours. This confusion also works in reverse. People with long horizons can look reckless to those with short ones. A young investor can pour money into volatile growth stocks because time is their safety net. A retiree, depending on fixed income, cannot afford that ride. The behavior of one looks irrational to the other, but both are right for their circumstances. This is why, Housel argues, there is no single correct strategy. Every financial plan must be tailored to the investor's personal timeline, not to what the crowd is doing. Trouble begins when we copy strategies suited to someone else's goals. You see a friend making money trading options or piling into risky assets, and you feel tempted. But if your needs are different, their approach could wreck you. The lesson is humility. When you watch the market, remind yourself that you're looking at a giant voting machine where thousands of different motives collide. Prices are not verdicts on your plan. They are a noisy blend of everyone's plans. Housel puts this into practice by tuning out much of the noise. He doesn't try to guess what short-term traders will do next. He focuses on aligning his money with his family's time horizon, values, and goals. That means holding enough cash for safety, investing the rest for decades, and ignoring the temptations of fads. This also applies to personal comparisons. Seeing someone else's wealth, house, or lifestyle can feel like a judgment on your own progress. But they are living a different story with different trade-offs. You don't see the stress behind their choices, the risks they took, or the sacrifices they made. Trying to mimic them is like borrowing someone else's map in a completely different landscape. At its heart, this chapter is about independence of thought. True financial strength comes from knowing what game you are playing and refusing to be distracted by those playing a different one. When you understand that you and the person on the other side of a trade may want completely different things, you stop taking their behavior as a signal about your own. Housel's advice is clear. Define your own game. Decide what time horizon you care about, what risks you can tolerate, and what trade-offs you're willing to make. Then remind yourself constantly that the market is not built to serve your goals, it is built to serve everyone's. That means the noise will never stop. Your job is not to eliminate it, but to rise above it. By grounding yourself in your own timeline, you can stay calm when others panic and cautious when others are euphoric. You can resist the pull of envy and the lure of imitation, and you can build a strategy that works for you, not for them. Next, in Chapter 17, Housel explains why bad news is so persuasive, why pessimism sells better than optimism, and how to resist its pull without losing sight of risk. Chapter 17. The Seduction of Pessimism. If optimism is the fuel of progress, pessimism is the clickbait that sells. Morgan Housel begins this chapter with an observation. Pessimism just sounds smarter. It feels cautious, sophisticated, even moral. Optimism, by contrast, often sounds naive or childish. This bias colors how we interpret financial news, how we react to crises, and how we make long-term decisions about money. The human brain is wired for survival. In the ancient world, assuming the worst could save your life. Better to mistake a stick for a snake than the other way around. That instinct lingers. We give pessimism more weight because it feels like protection. An optimist risks disappointment. A pessimist feels prepared. In finance, this bias becomes dangerous. The stock market, by design, grows over time because human productivity grows. But along the way, setbacks and crises are constant. A pessimist points to each downturn as proof that the system is collapsing. And in the moment, the pessimist looks convincing. Losses hurt more than gains feel good. Bad news is loud and urgent. Optimism is quiet and slow. History proves the contrast. In the last century, investors endured 2 world wars, the Great Depression, oil shocks, political assassinations, inflation, terrorism, financial crises, and pandemics. Each event triggered a flood of pessimistic headlines predicting permanent decline. Yet, across that same century, global wealth multiplied many times over. The pessimists were persuasive in the moment. The optimists, patient and often ridiculed, were right in the long run. Housel notes that pessimism sells particularly well in media. A headline warning of collapse demands attention. A headline about steady progress gets ignored. The financial press thrives on alarm bells because fear compels us to click, read, and watch. Optimism, being gradual, doesn't break news. There is also an asymmetry of perception. Progress tends to be incremental, A little more technology, a little more productivity, a little more wealth. Problems arrive suddenly, crashes, scandals, disasters. Our attention naturally gravitates to the sudden. This makes the world look riskier and bleaker than it really is. We see every crash in detail, but the silent march of compounding fades into the background. Consider the 2008 financial crisis. Pessimists predicted a second Great Depression. They sounded rational. In the short term, they looked right. But within a decade, markets had not only recovered but reached new heights. The optimists who stayed invested were rewarded, though they looked foolish at the time. Housel stresses that optimism is not about blind faith. It is about recognizing that while setbacks are inevitable, progress is the default outcome of human ingenuity. It is about remembering that the long-term arc bends upward even though the short-term path is jagged. The seduction of pessimism is strongest when wealth is at risk. Losing money hurts more than gaining money pleases, a phenomenon psychologists call loss aversion. A single scary forecast can overpower decades of evidence. This explains why investors sell low in panic and buy high in euphoria. They are pulled by the emotional gravity of pessimism in downturns. The antidote, Housel suggests, is perspective. Step back from daily headlines and recall the long sweep of history. Yes, problems are constant, but so is progress. The modern world, with its health, technology, and living standards, would have looked miraculous to those who lived a century ago. That miracle happened not because pessimists were right, but because optimists kept building through the noise. Another guardrail is patience. If you measure success over days or months, pessimism dominates. If you measure over decades, optimism wins. Investors must choose their time horizon carefully. Short horizons make panic rational. Long horizons make patience rational. Ultimately, the seduction of pessimism is a psychological trap. It feels sophisticated, but it is short-sighted. Optimism feels simple, but it is resilient. The greatest fortunes in history were built not by those predicting collapse, but by those betting that progress, though messy, continues. Housel closes with a warning. The next crisis will come, and the pessimists will again sound convincing. But if you prepare mentally, you can resist their pull. Remember that setbacks are the fee you pay for long-term growth. Remember that pessimism is loud, optimism is quiet, and quiet compounding is what builds wealth. Next, in Chapter 18, Housel explores how uncertainty makes us vulnerable to stories and why compelling narratives often overpower sober facts in shaping financial behavior. Chapter 18. When you'll believe anything. Picture a stormy night, and the power goes out. In the dark, every creak of the house sounds suspicious. Our minds rush to fill the void with stories because uncertainty is uncomfortable. Morgan Housel argues that money works the same way. In moments of confusion, fear, or rapid change, people will believe almost anything that gives them a sense of certainty. The core point is that finance is not driven solely by facts. It is driven by stories. Numbers, charts, and models matter, but they only influence people when they are wrapped in a narrative that feels believable. In times of uncertainty, we don't look for accuracy first, we look for comfort. This explains why so many financial bubbles and crashes are fueled by compelling but false stories. In the late 1990s, the internet was going to transform everything overnight. In the mid-2000s, housing prices could never fall nationwide. More recently, crypto projects have been pitched as risk-free revolutions. Each of these narratives contained a grain of truth, but the story was magnified far beyond reality. People believed not because the evidence was sound, but because the story made the future feel less uncertain. Housel stresses that this isn't about stupidity. Even smart, educated people fall for stories because humans are wired to crave order. We want to believe the world follows patterns we can grasp. A neat story is easier to live with than messy uncertainty. When the economy feels unpredictable, the most reassuring story wins, even if it's wrong. Take 2008 as an example. Banks and investors convinced themselves that mortgage-backed securities were safe. They had models, ratings, and data. But more than that, they had a story that housing prices always rose and therefore risk was minimal. This story was intoxicating because it relieved anxiety about uncertainty. People didn't want to face the possibility of falling prices. Believing the story felt easier. When reality broke the narrative, the cost was catastrophic. On the flip side, during downturns, pessimistic stories spread faster than facts. A sharp market drop sparks headlines of doom, which people cling to because they explain chaos. It feels safer to latch onto a scary but simple story than to admit that nobody knows what happens next. Fear, dressed up as narrative, fills the void. So what can we do? Housel argues that the antidote is humility. Accept that uncertainty is permanent. Resist the urge to fill every gap with a story that feels too neat. Good investing requires living with ambiguity, admitting what you don't know, and focusing on what you can control, like saving, diversification, and time horizons. He also suggests remembering how seductive stories are. If something feels too good or too perfectly explains the world, pause before acting. Ask, is this supported by evidence, or am I believing it because it makes me feel comfortable? Often, the most powerful financial skill is not seeking the most exciting story, but sticking with the boring truth that compounding and patience work, even if they don't make thrilling headlines. Housel closes by pointing out that stories are not all bad. They are necessary tools for making sense of complexity. But we must hold them lightly. When a story starts to feel like certainty, it's time to question it. The world is uncertain, and no narrative will change that. The strongest investors are those who can tolerate not knowing rather than believing anything just to ease discomfort. The moral is simple. In finance, beware of narratives that feel too smooth, too perfect, or too safe. Stories may comfort us, but reality always has the final word. Next, in Chapter 19, Housel weaves the book's lessons into one set of principles, showing how they work in harmony when applied with consistency and patience. Chapter 19. All together now. Imagine you've been handed pieces of a puzzle, one chapter at a time. You've studied compounding, risk, patience, envy, history, room for error, the pull of pessimism, and the seduction of stories. In this chapter, Morgan Housel steps back and clicks the puzzle together. All together now is his way of showing how the ideas of the book form a single, usable framework for living with money. The essence is simple. Wealth is not built on intelligence alone. It's built on behavior. Most financial mistakes stem not from lack of knowledge, but from lack of consistency. And most financial success flows not from secret formulas, but from a handful of principles repeated again and again. Housel reduces the book's lessons to a kind of playbook. First, respect compounding. Wealth grows slowly, then suddenly, as small gains build on one another. That means your most important job is to stay in the game long enough for compounding to work. Which leads to the second rule: survival matters more than optimization. Efficiency is fragile, durability is strength. Keep slack in your system, avoid ruinous risks, and embrace room for error. Third, remember that people play different games. What looks reckless to you may be rational for someone else, and what looks wise for them may be dangerous for you. Define your own game and measure success by your own yardstick. Fourth, expect surprises. History is a record of the unexpected. Planning is essential, but so is humility. Build resilience into your plan so you can withstand the events you can't predict. Fifth, resist the lure of envy. Compare less. Focus more on freedom, independence, and the life you want to live. Sixth, accept that nothing is free. Every reward comes with a cost, often in the form of volatility, stress, or patience. Pay that price knowingly, rather than resentfully, and you'll be better prepared to endure. Seventh, balance optimism with realism. Believe in progress, but prepare for setbacks. Don't confuse short-term noise with long-term outcomes. Remember that pessimism sounds smarter, but optimism compounds better. Finally, recognize the power of stories. They shape markets, careers, and societies. But don't let yourself be ruled by them. Question the narratives that feel too neat or too certain. A good investor can live with ambiguity rather than reaching for comforting myths. What unites all of these lessons is psychology. Money decisions are less about spreadsheets and more about temperament. Housel emphasizes that you don't need brilliance to succeed. You need humility, patience, resilience, and self-awareness. These traits are rare, but they are learnable, and they compound just like money does. He admits openly that his own financial strategy is boring by Wall Street standards. Save consistently, invest broadly, keep plenty of cash, avoid debt, and wait. No dazzling predictions, no risky bets, no chasing fads. Yet it works because it is sustainable. It aligns with his goals and allows him to sleep well at night. That, he insists, is the point. This chapter reads like a pause, a reminder that the grand ideas of the book are not meant to be admired, but applied. You don't need all of them at once. Even a few will transform how you handle money. The goal is not perfection, but progress, to shift your mindset so that your decisions compound in your favor instead of against you. The chapter ends with a simple truth. Finance is not about beating others at their game. It's about mastering your own. Next, in Chapter 20, Housel pulls back the curtain on his personal choices, sharing the habits and philosophies that shape how he manages his own money. Chapter 20. Confessions. After exploring history, psychology, risk, compounding, envy, and stories, Morgan Housel ends the book on a personal note. He calls this chapter Confessions because he wants to show that his own financial life is not a textbook model, but a reflection of values and trade-offs. He admits right away his strategy is deliberately conservative. He and his wife keep far more cash than most financial advisors would recommend. Why? Because it gives them peace of mind. Cash may not earn much, but it buys flexibility and freedom from stress. For them, the psychological return is worth more than the potential extra gains. He also confesses that he avoids debt, even good debt. Rationally, a low-interest loan could be fine. But emotionally, debt feels like chains. He prefers the independence of owing no one. This, again, is not about maximizing efficiency. It is about maximizing freedom. Housel stresses that these confessions are not prescriptions. He is not saying everyone should copy his habits. The point is that each financial plan should be tailored to the individual. What matters is finding an approach that matches your personality, your goals, and your ability to sleep at night. The worst financial plan is the one you abandon in fear. The best is the one you can stick with for decades. He repeats one of the book's central ideas: money's greatest value is not luxury or status, but control over your time. The freedom to wake up and do what you want, with whom you want, for as long as you want, that is real wealth. Every decision he makes flows from that principle. By ending on confession, Housel reinforces the humility that runs through the book. He is not presenting himself as a guru with all the answers. He is reminding us that finance is deeply personal, that trade-offs are inevitable, and that honesty about what matters to you is the foundation of a sound plan. And with that, we reach the end of the psychology of money. Across 20 chapters, Morgan Housel has shown that financial success is less about spreadsheets and more about behavior. It's about patience, resilience, humility, and understanding your own game. Thank you for listening all the way through. I hope this journey has not only sharpened your view of money, but also deepened your understanding of yourself. If you found value in this audiobook-style summary, please consider subscribing, liking, and sharing it with others who might benefit. Your support helps us keep creating thoughtful content and spreading these ideas further. Remember, the rules of wealth are simple but not easy. Stay patient, stay humble, and let compounding of money and of good decisions do the heavy lifting.